Thanks for joining us, Brian.
Mhm.
This episode, we're going to be talking about the evolution of the CISO and where it is now, where it was before, and what's changed. And I think you're well placed, Brian, to put us straight and give us some insights into it. I'll start with a quick intro of myself. My name's Jan Kodabash from Universal Technology Solutions. I'm an engineer by trade, and I spend most of my time helping clients fix problems and overcome challenges. I think that's the best part of my job. I do a lot of other boring stuff, but I won't mention those. So, Brian, do you want to give a quick intro to yourself?
Sure. Yeah. So Brian Wagner, I've been, my pedigree is an engineer, a software engineer in this case. But these days, I've kind of transcended software engineering to technical pre-sales, to business development over AWS. So I started in technical pre-sales there as a solutions architect in the security space. I kind of fell into it over there actually. I came to pre-sales engineering or technical pre-sales from a developer mindset, and come to realize in the enterprise space that everybody actually not only cared about the technology, but they also cared about the security of everything. Moved into a role, a compliance-focused role, actually at AWS. That's where I kind of eventually landed at, looking after risk when financial institutions in particular were moving to the cloud. And that was launched kind of the rest of my my security career into Silicon Valley. So from AWS to Silicon Vally, now at a Y Combinator startup. So I've got kind of a hybrid of experience somewhere between software engineering and security and compliance.
Okay. So the subject, like I said, you're well placed to talk about the subject, but maybe start off with just giving a kind of like your overview of what the CISO is.
Yeah.
And bear in mind, from my perspective, maybe say 10 years ago, or probably a little bit more, that role didn't exist, or at least it came under the umbrella of maybe technology solutions or something like that. Now it's a complete role. But maybe give us your view on what the objectives of that role is.
Yeah. Well, first, I would say it definitely existed 10 years ago, but as you say, it existed in a sort of a different state. I think 10 plus years ago, you'd be, I think, surprised to find that the CISO role was a board level, sort of, directly reporting to a board in any case. Usually the CISO would be placed under the CIO, which actually makes a lot of sense. So Chief Information Security Officer under the Chief Information Officer, it kind of makes sense. I think to some degree, probably made a little bit less sense under the CTO at the time. And I'll kind of explain what I mean by that in a minute. But these days, I think the organizations that are, I don't know. I think you can tell a lot about an organization is where the CISO sits in the org chart. Let's put it that way. Not to say that if they don't report directly to the board, that the org doesn't care about security. That's certainly not what I'm saying. But I think that the CISO role should differentiate itself from, on its own. It should be its own kind of department. I think historically, it did not typically report into the board, as I said. For, I think, probably some valid reasons. I think the landscape was different then. The perimeter security was a thing. So it's like, well, your CISO, when you look at, what risks you face, all you have to do is you enter the data center and you look at the walls and the ceiling, and you look at the HVAC and your power supply and all that. And that was sort of the boundary back, like maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago, but that was the boundary back then. These days, as the perimeter has eroded significantly, I would say that by and large, a CISO needs to be maybe more technical than they used to be. There's plenty of CISOs out there, very successful CISOs that actually didn't come from a tech background, which is not a bad thing. Again, this is not about right or wrong or good or bad. This is more about, the topic is evolution, right? So I think these days, the major changes would be that I think a CISO is probably going to end up being more technical than they used to be. And also, I think ideally from an organizational point of view, report directly to the board.
Actually, that's interesting. Yeah, you're right in that way. I've recently, over the last few years worked with a CISO who is very technical. I mean, into either the detail of a problem or a solution. And then there's also others who really are more, I guess, not less hands-on, but have like a wider view of the security landscape. So it doesn't necessarily, like you say, have to be one or the other. I think I prefer them when they're not so hands-on. It's an interesting one. So when we talk about the CISO then of that time, when I know it's not that long ago, and you said that the landscape was different, but I guess most of the things now, I think, do you agree that the reason maybe it's changed, there wasn't so much compliance and regulatory requirements that were enforced on organizations' tech stack before? So a lot of it was just making sure our security peers were in place. There wasn't so much, nowadays you do have penalties and compliance. So that's probably maybe where it's raised the awareness and also requirement. Someone has to be accountable, I guess.
I mean, I think regulation has something to do with it, but I mean, in my experience in the regulatory field, or at least facing off with the regulators, is it's not so much a mandate on your tech stack. It's more of, it's outcome based, right? If you think about what a regulator's role in an industry is, and my primary regulatory industry would be financial services, but there are plenty of other regulated industries out there, healthcare, life sciences, for example. But their role is to protect the industry. So they're looking after things, like concentration risk, data protection, et cetera, as a whole. So it's not so much what is the strength of the key that you're using to encrypt, or what is the algorithm that you're using to encrypt, or whatever. It's the fact that you are encrypting, right? So it's a balance between sort of practical day-to-day requirements and and like I say, like outcome based. So I would say, in contrast to that, is why the change. I think the advent of not cloud for cloud's sake, but the advent of service-based services consumption, I guess. As I say before, kind of yesteryear, it was your role is to protect the data center that you're in, or the multiple data centers that you're in. And anytime there was an egress from your data center, over the network, then of course those controls and those things have to be looked after, which is obviously very, very important. But these days, if you think about things like Microsoft 360, all the different storage options you have, cloud, Slack. I mean, think of all the different tools that we sort of generally use day to day. Almost all of them are service-based tools, including the cloud, right? The cloud is controlled entirely by APIs. It's a service. That has changed, I think, the role significantly, which is why I say that I would say that it would be a more technical role these days, because in order to interact with these services, it is a technical concept, right? If the cloud, it's APIs. Sure, there is a website where you can point and click and do what you need to do, but your normal production operations for most cloud enterprise users is in the API coming from their own systems and their own networks. That means you have to build these tools, which means that there's engineering involved, which means you have to secure it at the engineering level if you want to establish a higher degree of security maybe than you were used to when, again, you were just in the data center. So like I say, it's about the erosion of the network boundary these days. Everything traverses the network now. So network security is incredibly important, but more importantly, what are you sending over the network, which is generally looking at developers and code. An application developer's role is not to write secure code. I mean, ideally they would be cross-trained in that, but their job is to fulfill a business purpose. I'm writing code to do a thing. But how safe is that code? Is that going to send personal information? Is that going to send confidential information where we don't want it to send? Are you comfortable with where that destination is? Like, these are not the things that your typical software engineer has to think about. They're saying, I have this mandate. This is the outcome that I need to produce, and I'm going to go ahead and produce it. So it's the injection of that process, which I think requires a technical technical mindset from the new modern day CISO.
Yeah, so you mentioned the cloud there in particular, and I've come across scenarios where that you would have thought that the standard process for security governance covers third-party service. I don't see why not, but why? I mean, you talked about processes in general. Again, they're third-party processes and how those practices are being used. But it seems to be that part in cloud security itself still is kind of like an area that people are still getting wrong or kind of focus on and need a lot of help.
Oh yeah.
In fact, it's where you could argue it can come under a third-party security policy agreement, but a lot of places have their own cloud security policy. Have you been involved in particular in that area, and maybe mention a couple of challenges? I've got a few that I've seen, but maybe that you've seen or you've had to deal with.
Yeah, I think broadly, and so yeah, I've actually had a lot of experience in that field, which makes me really effective at my current role. But even historically, that's been the last, I don't know, 5-6 years in particular of a focus. I think broadly, without giving a specific example, because I'll wait for you to kind of share your examples. I think broadly the reason for that is the cloud has kind of changed the way that software engineering is done, or fundamentally. And what I mean by that is the cloud is now so granular that you build it, you run it, the classic sort of DevOps mantra. You suddenly find a typical application engineer that is, like I said before, their job is to fulfill the business requirement, but now they have to consider things like the permissions of the identity that they're using to interact with the cloud. What is the network egress for that particular service? Are they even using a server? The serverless is now sort of the evolution of cloud is now there are no servers. So what does that look like from a security point of view, from a network egress point of view? Are you encrypting the data in flight? Are you, if you're using, let's say, runtime executions, what access do you have to the underlying storage there? That storage is all temporary. So, are the environment variables encrypted? Things like that. Those are things that didn't have to be thought about when everything was in the data center, right? You don't have to worry about those things. You're executing code that the code itself lives in the basement of the data center, and the control, the egress of that is managed by the security team, which is this black box. If you're an engineer, the cloud has moved all of that up the stack. Now every single call, every single change, every single interaction is identity aware. Was that you that did that, or was that me that did that? Do you have different access than I do? I have read, you have write, for example. This is all net new concepts, which I think has required an evolution of the control environment as well, right? So, and that's where I'm kind of even falling back to what I was saying before. The technical understanding of these concepts, ideally you'd have to come from that background as an engineer to say, right, I know what it used to be like, and I have all these new requirements now. I need to understand those requirements. I need to understand what it is I'm dealing with. When I'm granting access, should I just give star access because I don't know any better? No, I mean, policy language is really complex in the cloud providers. It can be really complex if you want it to be. And if you're going by the policy of least privilege, then you're going to have some pretty complex policies to write. But again, that's something that you need to think about, and from an engineering point of view, how can I enable my developers to continue developing without introducing the business to any unacceptable risk. So
and that's a point there where the policy is complex, but also that policy is in the cloud, especially, is very granular. There's a lot more control around those policies.
Mm-hmm.
Identity awareness is to an instance or to a service even, which we didn't really have that level before. So you would have thought then that having that ability, the cloud can be more secure. So is it a case of approach to cloud was maybe a little bit wrong, and this is where I was coming from, is that engineers kind of went in and started working. However, the security element came in a little bit later, and that wasn't aligned really. Because if you think about it, if we can get cloud a lot more secure, or a lot more provide a lot more granular security in the cloud, surely then we can make it more secure than even our on-prem. So it's not a problem. But maybe it's the way the approach happened. You know, people came in, started building, and security became an issue, and like a little bit of an afterthought, which generally is the case, I guess, with security.
It is.
People start putting things in until they think, actually, you know what, we haven't had security or infosec look at this. Let's have, and then, you know, so maybe it's the approach.
I mean, you're not wrong there, and I wouldn't call it right or wrong. I think, and you absolutely called it out, which is, I think in most cases, most enterprise cases, security is, comes in later. But again, that kind of goes back to the CISO. What is who in this context? I would say it's not that the CISO has to drive everything in that regard, but it's what is the culture of security at your organization? That is fundamental, and that is where the CISO comes into play, right? It doesn't matter how technical or non-technical, but it's about the culture of security at the organization. Is security seen as a blocker, or are they seen as an enabler? In my experience, I try to move the needle into being an enabler. If you have to, this scenario you just gave, which is incredibly common, right? We start building something and then, maybe we need to get this checked. The reasons for that are usually one of two. One is like, well, they're just going to slow us down, or two, they're just going to say no, and this whole project gets scuppered. Culturally speaking, in a security organization that does not have that, that relationship with the rest of the business, it's because they're enablers. They're the ones there to say, not so much no, I don't understand it, so the answer is no, but it's more like, how do I make this a yes? What do I need to do, or what do we need to do in order to make this safe? Because no matter what, I cannot think of any business case or any business scenario that, when you want to expand or grow or progress, does not introduce risk. It's not possible. You want to enter a new market, you're introducing risk. You want to add a new product, you're introducing risk. Expansion is risky. It is. It absolutely fundamentally is risky. That is the nature of all business, from the very first day to businesses that have been around for hundreds of years. So how do you still grow without destroying your risk posture? Is have security take a look at it. And that's the cultural side, to say, how do we make this a yes? Which means understanding those policies, which means understanding the control environment and adapting your policies to meet those needs. And again, like I say, it goes right back to the technical nature of the CISO role, is because these are very technical concepts that should really be understood.
Yeah. And so, the engineer themselves, or the kind of developer, or the technical person, and you talk about maybe company culture, but I always think that person, whoever it is, and even if it's from an operator level, needs to have, and even more so now, whether there's a CISO or not, the ability to look at something and say, is there risk involved in this? Now, that could be even just related to a change. I think if you just kind of tier on, I should also be looking at, is this secure? Their first step should be, then I'm deploying something. I need to look at if this is, even if it's from, adding something to a product catalog, to look at it in advance, so they can have their view on it. So going back to security being everyone's problem, not just CISO. So then not being a blocker, because that's the main one, I think. I always say, and then it's not just in any type of hierarchy role, where you're enforcing a policy or something like that. How do you make that less of a blocker? So, because you want things to be enabled, you want people to work, but also work within certain guidelines, make it easier for them, rather than, like you say, saying no. I think is probably the easiest job, but saying no because you can't do this, or you say no, but also you can do it this way, and these are the guidelines you need. That's where the money's earned, isn't it? A lot of people, there's too many people just saying no, you can't do it, and then just leaving. How can you do that, or what from your experience? Where's that worked, or how can you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of both. If you look at an org chart, I think it comes from both sides. One is if that CISO is sort of at the table from like I say, from the board level, are they getting information on, firsthand in terms of what the next pursuit is for the business that generally comes at the board level, or are they getting it second or third hand? Are they getting filtered information from their, from their leadership? So if they're, like I say, reporting into the CTO, reporting into a CIO, that's a riskier relationship than saying if they're getting it firsthand. But then again, there are very good CIO and CISO teams out there that that communicate that well. So first of all is knowing what's coming, right? So absolutely having a seat at that table, not being second or third or fourth or fifth to know about it. The scenario you described, which is we call security in later on. Well, that by then it's going to be maybe not too late, but it's certainly harder to do. So are they getting that information at the same time as everyone else? That's kind of one side of it. And the other side is scalability through knowledge, or the concept of train the trainer. Security, it depends on how you look at it. And again, this is all about culture and organizations and stuff like that. Is security a cost, or is it like an investment? Is it a revenue generator? You might look at that at face value and say, well, if our output is not security tools, then security is a cost to us. Therefore, we want to reduce costs as much as possible. That's a pretty common mindset. Maybe not explicitly, but that's why you're not seeing let's take half of our budget and throw it at security. You say no, let's get as much security as we need, and and we'll stop there. But with that in mind, security should be a scalable resource. You said it yourself, which is it's everybody's problem. How do you make it everybody's problem, or everybody thinking about it? Is you have to scale that knowledge somehow. So at the engineering level, if you only have a band of maybe a handful of really good security engineers, embed them in the development process. Have them train the developers. That developer that maybe didn't have to think about the identity or the permissions or the encryption, teach them to start thinking about it. Have security engineering write tests that will validate this stuff. So it's incremental. Instead of saying, right, everybody's going on a 3-week course on cybersecurity and make sure that you remember everything and implement it in your day-to-day, it's not realistic. But if you say, right, I wrote a line of, I wrote a function today, I checked it into the source repository, and it went through some code scanning or ran some tests, and once the test passes, it gets committed, moves on to the next stage. Just inject one more test in there that says, did you write something that could change permissions? Did you write something that could, did you change a network address? Instead of going to this service, you're now going there. If you look for, just like I say, look for those certain, just little bits here and there. And again, that developer, their goal is to get that code promoted to the next, into development. If we're adding tests, if we're adding checkpoints, again, just little bits by little bits, incremental, why should they, do they need to know that port 443 is more secure than port 80? Hopefully today we should know that, right? Port 80 is almost dead. But if you didn't know that, how would you know that? Or would you care? Well, you would care if you're a developer saying, I checked this code in and it won't let me go because I'm not using a secure port. It's stuff like that will help drive behavior, right? So you're saying, I can't do my job today. I can't check that code in. Why not? Because this particular code is insecure. That's the kind of stuff that will scale just purely by routine, by muscle memory at that point. So hopefully you're getting that firsthand information, and from the other side, I don't want to call it the bottom. That's a little bit, I think it's a little bit, what's the word? I don't think it's the right word, but to foster that security for everybody.
And I just wrote down here, there needs to be, I guess it ties into the governance of the organization.
Oh,
yeah. People look at governance and they think it's really, well, as soon as you look at that, it's a blocker straight away if you've got to go through the level. But it doesn't necessarily, it's just a word that, like you said, is as long as there's a process, even if you want to call it, that ties in those teams, those engineering teams, especially, because sometimes there's I would say a lot more engineering effort from day-to-day work that goes on that's not security focused. Yeah. And they're the ones who are first at the problems, first at deploying, or first at purchasing something, especially if the budget's there. They're the ones that have to have that tie-in. But maybe it doesn't necessarily always work like that, and we're still in organizations today where that's a bit of an afterthought. I mean, so let's look at today then, the CISO today. You talked about then cloud. Would you say, for example, the main difference today of having a CISO is, I mean, is it around cloud? Is AI the next part from a risk posture?
Yeah, that's a fair ask. I think even in AI though, if you're AI is it's a broad term, and it definitely needs to be looked at, because AI is truly part of that growth story these days. As I said before, you can't grow without risk. You just can't. I actually have a great example, and I'm not going to name names because that's names of companies, because that's not fair. I was recently looking for a new tool for where I work now. And I don't even want to say the domain, just to, like I say, it's not really fair to these companies who are doing really, really good job. I was comparing tools, third-party tools, and all the ones I was evaluating probably like 7 or 8 tools. And I was testing the AI capabilities of some of these tools, because that was actually one of the things that I wanted, is an AI capability for this particular domain of tooling. And I came across one tool which was highly recommended by whatever, and it didn't actually have any AI capability, and it said it was coming soon. And I'm like, oh wow! Like, out of all of these competitors, that and AI just kind of became accessible in the last 18 months. It's incredible that I'm already making decisions based on something not having an AI capability. Now back to what you were saying about like CISO and AI and stuff like that, it is cloud in a way where you have to get your head around it. You have to understand it. If you are going to use a third-party service as a CISO, if you're protecting information, there's a few things you need to think about. Is one, what data am I sending over there? Right. That's what GDPR did for everybody. It made you think about what data you're sending over. And I had so much trouble explaining this when it first came out. I was working at Amazon at the time in the security and compliance space. It is not so much we prevent you from sending this data over, but it's more as you, as the controller of the data, are responsible for knowing what data you're providing a particular service. So what that has led to is, I want to onboard this particular service. How, am I putting customer data over there? Am I putting internal data over there? And if so, do those hold different requirements, security requirements for what we want to do with it? The same is true for AI. That's the kind of the first port of call, is saying, should I just pull up ChatGPT and put in my my inner company secrets in there and ask them to summarize those secrets? I don't know. Maybe. It depends, right? It depends on where those secrets get stored. It depends on how the models are trained. I don't know how much you know about AI and building AI, but those models have to be trained. And how do you train a model? Well, a human has to train a model. In some cases, they call it fine tuning. There are machine ways to do it, but most broadly, you're going to have a human that says, I read this, and yes, I agree with this output, or no, I don't agree with this output. But then who is that human? Are they in a jurisdiction? Are they authorized to read the things that you've sent over? So you can privatize AI. You can say, right, I'm going to take AI, I'm going to build that into the cloud, and all the major cloud providers have it. But I guess, anyway, I'm sort of going off on a tangent. The point is, AI is indeed another frontier of security, CISO consideration. I think it is a smaller, in a good way, an easier problem to solve than cloud for a CISO. I think the options, there are fewer dials and knobs and levers to operate than there are in cloud. I mean, cloud is truly a complete restructuring of your entire IT landscape if you want it to be. Whereas AI is a tool like Slack or an email service provider. You need to know where the data is going, where it's stored, how it's encrypted, if it's encrypted, where you got the model, et cetera, et cetera. And if you're not comfortable with any of those things, simply bring it in-house and you can protect it all yourself. So I think it's, like I say, I think it's a lower risk with a much greater, well, I shouldn't say much greater, it's hard to measure. It's a lower risk if you want it to be, with a massive reward from a business point of view.
Yeah, I think, now that you've said that, I was looking at, okay, so with it being, that's because this same thing happened, say for example, when social media first came out. Should people be putting in security policies for AI related product or content, or should there be an AI specific policy? Because the question is raised there, they don't really fall, unless they fall under another category of like if you go and look at I guess network management security policy today, I'm guessing it doesn't have any relationship as to what you can use to train information. It doesn't have any of that. So are people doing that? Are people putting an AI basic policy in place? Because like you say someone wants to use ChatGPT, in the corporate environment, or there may be other things, bringing a product in that has some type of AI capability. Do they have to have a checklist? Say, actually, I need to bring security in here because are people actually putting? And it might be at a high level. Is that a question?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for the most part, I think AI capabilities of any given tool should be covered already under third-party policy or policies that cover third-party data sharing. Because if you think about, again, the tool I was talking about, which again I won't name, but that didn't have the AI capability, did that make it less risky? I think is a good example than, say, a tool that did have AI. And I don't think so, because it's still a third party. You still have to go through the same checks and verifications. Say, are you ISO 27001 certified? Are you SOC 2 if it's US based? Is it US based? What country is it based in? What country is the AI based in? Because sometimes the AI is domiciled in the United States, for example, and even though your service endpoint is in the EU or something like that. But even still, those capabilities, AI or otherwise, I don't think they fundamentally change third-party data sharing policies. I think so I don't know. I guess to answer your question directly, I don't think AI-specific policies are necessarily on the horizon anytime soon, or is it necessary? It's certainly more granular than what you might have in a third-party policy regarding third-party data. But where I was going to go with this is what we will see from AI, I think, in this case. Oops, sorry, I lost the screen. God, where was I going with that? What to edit this out? Yeah, I forgot where I was going with that. To be honest, I had a thought and I lost the thought. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the screen went blank. Okay, but look. Okay, because we kind of, again, we like we did last time, we went off in a tangent on something quite technical. We come back now to say the CISO role now, and that evolution of what it is now. Companies, not all companies can have a CISO type role.
No.
And there is a term that's come out which is like virtual CISO capability, where people are kind of, it's not like a hiring of a CISO, but they hire in the capability just for kind of days. Have you come across that? That was a new term to me until a few years ago, but people offering smaller companies, because security is a big issue, but they can't afford to have one person just look at security. So have you come across that?
Yeah, virtual CISO or fractional is another one. Fractional CISO, I would say the same even for CTO. Fractional is a thing, because sometimes we'll go keep it on CISO, but you don't, like you say, you don't need it full time all the time. I think there's a certain critical mass, and I think that critical mass is sort of different for every organization. But you don't always need a full time CISO. I think it's a great way to reduce the cost of security. As I said before, security in most cases is a cost to a business. It's a cost, and it's an opportunity cost. It's like insurance. Like you never go looking for insurance that says, oh, I want to pay the most money I can pay for insurance. No one says that. You actually say, I want to pay the least amount I can pay, but at a threshold of, let's say, excess, voluntary excess and coverage and whatever that I'm comfortable with, right? So, but if you could pay less, you would, right? Isn't that, I mean, generally speaking, as individual consumers, and probably even at the corporate level, that's probably, you don't have insurance, and you get into that car accident, like, okay, well, now you've got to pay all that money. And you're like, oh man, if you don't have a CISO, or you don't have a security culture, a security leadership, maybe it's not CISO level, what's the cost of that, right? You got to hope nothing bad happens. You got to hope it doesn't happen. So I think it's a great way. The virtual or the fractional CISO is a great way to keep costs relatively low for an organization that would benefit from that, and to inject security at some fundamental level long before that same business would have done it otherwise, right? Because if you're a jewelry shop, or I don't know, some sort of independent retailer or something like that, you started an online marketplace, you don't need a CISO. But if you start growing in popularity and like I say, critical mass, eventually, yeah, you're probably going to need someone to help you protect that data. But everything in between is great for these sort of virtual CISOs or fractional CISOs.
Yeah, no, I think it's really an interesting one. I think a lot of people will be using or didn't know exists, but can reach out for. So then, this is probably it's not a trick question, but it's not an unfair one. But I'm asking, what do you think some are the main kind of traits a good CISO would have, if you like, if we're going to describe someone, what can we put it that way? I know everyone's different, but say just from your perspective, what would you say that is?
Yeah, I think the number one trait, it transcends whether you come from a technical background or not, is business acumen, because again, the theme of this is like, if the security should be an enabler, not a something, not a hindrance. And how are you going to enable a business if you don't understand the business, right? That is fundamental. That's what I mean. Like earning, having a seat at that table, or even earning it at the board or whatever the appropriate table is. They will include you. You'll be included, but you've got to understand like the commercial, risk. Like, okay, we're not doing that. We're not going to cloud. Like, well, if we don't go to cloud, what are we losing out commercially speaking as a business? What are we missing out on? So number one is business acumen. You've got to, you can't just speak in dark, scary terms all the time. That's very typical. I see a lot of security people like to use scare tactics, right? You think about, malware and ransomware and all this stuff. Like, well, let's talk about growth and business prosperity, and let's start there. And then let's see what we can do to achieve that from a security point of view. That's absolutely number one. Number two is empathy. Like, because it's kind of follows second with that is, I'm not telling you no, we need to find a way to say yes. And that is a really frustrating conversation to have. People on the business side, that's why they avoid security people. They avoid them because they're just like, nope, absolutely not, too risky. What's next? Let's talk about that USB drive sticking out of your laptop. No one wants to talk to that guy or girl. So you've got to have the empathy for the rest of it. You're saying, look, when someone comes to you and says, I get where you're coming from, security person, but it's really slowing me down. And you can't say, too bad. I mean, you can say that, but what I mean by empathy is say, all right, well, what else can we do? Like, do we need to loan you a couple of security engineers for a couple of weeks to help you get caught up, or help put some automation in place to make this a non-starter for you? So it's understanding the impact that security has on the business, rather than just being that no person swinging that big old hammer everywhere you go. And beyond that, other traits, like I say, then we can start getting into, are you more technical? Are you more sort of policy based and risk based? I think those things are really subjective, but those absolutely, those top two, those are absolutely transcend all of it.
Okay, and then what would you say then? So we've got a CISO, and we've spoken about the CISO from before and what they look like now. If you could have two hires, I don't know if two will be enough. I'm sure you've got more, but say for example your first two hires, who are they? What are they going to be?
Are you talking about as a CISO?
Yeah.
Definitely a security engineer, and the security engineer is that's definitely the first one. It's sort of a nebulous concept. You say, well, what are you exactly engineering? Are you engineering security tools or whatever? And I think that a really good security engineer is someone that can get involved at any level. You want to automate some control environments in your AWS cloud, great, they can do that. They can sit with the engineering team building actual applications for the business. They can get stuck into that as well. Like, it's a good versatile security engineer. Those are tough to come by, but you have at least one of those, and you're going to have a wizard on your hands, someone that's going to create tools for engineers to use. It's about scaling that, like I say, scaling that knowledge. That's what a good security engineer would do, and that's tough to do when you're looking at other things like policies and and risk and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then that second one probably falls closer to exactly that, which is sort of someone to look after policies, policy enforcement. What I mean by policy enforcement is, okay, we have a policy now that says two-factor authentication is enabled, and we're also using SSO for everything. Well, someone has to go out and do that, and keep track of all that. So I would say somebody that knows their way around, like I say, execution of policies would be really quite useful. And that way the leadership can wrangle all that together, get the information from the business, because really most things will come on one of those two streams. One of them is the engineering side, and the other one is sort of the policy and the compliance side.
Yeah, it's very rare where you get engineers who kind of align themselves to setting policy as well. It's difficult to get two of them, so I can see why both of them, would be and okay, that's a good pair that you've kind of described there. So then, I mean, we're getting close to the top of the hour, so I know this is usually supposed to be about a 30-minute call, but it's always over. But if I was to then say, and this is sometimes we do get questions, or someone will ask, well, for maybe not necessarily a CISO role, but someone who kind of wanted to train in security, what would you kind of, if you were to give someone advice on some type of training that they were supposed to do, or an area that they should kind of focus on, what ones would you come up with?
I mean, once you start unraveling the nature of security, there is really no one answer for that. I've actually recently spoken to someone who's changing careers. They're retraining themselves, and they're going to school to be basically a security analyst. So this person does not come from a software engineering background. They actually come from a completely different industry. So how do you get into security with that? Does that mean you can never do it? No, absolutely not. You can be trained from a SOC analyst, let's just say, to spot inconsistencies in logs, and then over time you sort of learn what that really means. So there's one way to get started. There's great certifications in that field, CompTIA. I don't remember the other ones, to be honest, but there's a lot of certifications you can get around that space, which are non-technical. My path, I didn't, like I say, I didn't start my career in security. I sort of fell into it. And from my personal experience, I think being an engineer, a software engineer for a time, and sort of a lot of other sort of types of engineering, is a really interesting path to security, because once you learn how something is made, you can understand how something is broken. I think that could be true even on the mechanical side, right? You get the best penetration testers out there, the physical ones, people that know how to pick locks within seconds. If you understand how a lock works, then that's going to be a lot easier to pick. You know that there are 5 tumblers and they have to be aligned in a certain way, and the spring tension on that cylinder has to be a certain way, and in which direction it moves. But to be able to pull that apart from a security point of view, whether it's an application or a network, like that's another one, is network security. Like you could be a network engineering your entire career, your entire life, and never have thought about security. Maybe not so true these days, But I guess what I'm saying is if you sat that person down and explained to them, what to look for in terms of risk, you'd be like, well, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Those packet headers should be this and this protocol should be that. It's a lot easier to apply security concepts if you have fundamental knowledge of how the thing should be working. And like I say, that could apply to anything, right? So that applies to application logs or network logs. It applies to software engineering. It applies to pretty much anything you could think of. So I would say whatever is interesting to an individual, learn how to do it first and then learn how to break it. I think that's the general guidance I typically give people that ask me a very similar question.
Yeah, and from my perspective on that is there are anyone starting out. There's always fundamental courses like say CompTIA or even Cisco or Palo Alto do their own. Any of them, you can't go wrong with any of them. But
no,
if each day you go to some of the even BBC Technology or whatever, there's always a new cyber threat. There's always if you just look it up, and you may not understand it the first time, but look at the terms, start getting familiar with the terms, and then kind of reversing those terms and look through those, and actually start beginning to understand it. Once you're in, cyber threat, 15, some of those will reoccur. Start getting familiar, to start to familiarize yourself with those. And I think that's a good way of just making small notes of those threats and understand, simplify. It's not going to be easy because, some of them are really convoluted, but you've got to start at that level to be more of a conversationalist in security. So, that part. Okay, no, I'm looking at the time again. I did want to get into maybe just a little bit on tools, but maybe we can do that another time, Brian. Sure. I think this was good. I think we've got quite good content out of it. What we'll do is we'll kind of edit some of it, send it to you. But yeah, the time just flew. I think
it did. Yeah, that's quick.
Yeah. So no, but thanks for that. That was good.
Thank you.
Appreciate.